I mean, I never thought that Elon Musk would make rockets like this,
Yeah.
that we would actually get the bullet nose shiny, spacecraft made of, aluminum or steel or whatever he's using now, brushed steel, is it? And, but when I was reading Heinlein when I was a kid, it was like some crazy billionaire, millionaire back then, finances these plucky scientists to build a rocket to the moon. And now we got that. I never thought that would happen.
There's a moment right at the beginning of this conversation today where I kind of lost the ability to speak coherently. You'll hear it in a minute, but when I asked today's guest to talk about his background, he went on to list all the TV shows that he wrote for, and it's basically like every science fiction series I watched from maybe age 15 to 30. And I had no idea where to begin with that. So even though we cover a lot of ground in this conversation, I feel like we only got to like a fraction of the questions that I had come to my mind regarding all the shows that he worked on. So Marc Scott Zicree is a science fiction writer, but he's also a sci-fi expert who sort of made his name by writing the quintessential guide to the original Twilight Zone series, and who has established himself as the go-to guy for anything Star Trek, probably because he worked as a writer on multiple Star Trek series. These days, he's a YouTuber by the name of Mr. Sci Fi, because all roads lead to YouTube, and he's crowdfunded his own series called Space Command, which he's currently filming. And I was happy to talk to him because, as a storyteller myself, I'm fascinated by the process, and it's always, just fun to talk shop. But I won't spend a lot of time talking about what we talked about. How about I let you listen to it for yourself? So, with that, here is my conversation with Marc Scott Zicree. Well, I kind of wanted to start with a bit of an apology because you reached out to me, and 90% of the time, I'm just trying to get the next video out, and I'm just like got my head down. And so I get approached by a lot of people for a lot of things, as you can probably imagine. And I saw yours and I looked you up and I was like, that's really cool, but I didn't really know what to do with it right now. So I don't even remember if I responded. I probably didn't because I'm a jackass. But anyway, no. So not too long ago, I just started doing this podcast.
Yeah.
And there's a channel, and I don't think I'm subscribed to it, but YouTube kind of keeps sending me their videos.
Yeah.
Film Courage. And your interview with them popped up, and I was like, wait, where do I know that guy?
Yes.
And then I kind of like realized, he'd be a good guest for this. So yeah, here we are. So
well, great.
Sorry it took so long.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here because I sincerely, I do love your videos. I actually watch them. I know that you just had that little thing on your face removed and all of that, and so actually you have new equipment. I'm paying attention. Uh-oh. And I love what you do because you're A, funny, and the jokes actually are funny, and B, the science stuff is great. I mean, just your whole approach to all of this is terrific because it's irreverent but scientifically accurate, and in these times of humor and craziness. I think you really are important in terms of what you're doing. So it's great. It's great.
Nice. I appreciate that. Thank you.
No,
I try to be as accurate as possible.
Yeah. And again,
miss the mark from time to time, but
no, but it's one thing that science fiction never predicted, all these movies and TV shows about pandemics and so forth, they never predicted that a large number of people would just not believe the science, not believe, that politicians for their own self-interest would misadvise the public so that their own voter base would be dying off. It's just lunacy. And, and so there's ways in which science fiction could never guess the oddities and extreme things happening now. So it's fascinating. For a science fiction writer, it's grist for the mill, of course.
Well, no, I've seen all the posts that are like, all the zombie movies had it totally wrong. Turns out people are just like, oh no, come on, it's there's no zombies out there, and then munch.
Yes, yeah. Well, I tell people that people often ask me what I think the most predictive and accurate science fiction movies are, predictive of the future we actually have, and I always say I think the two most accurate ones are Idiocracy and Don't Look Up.
Yeah. Don't Look Up's come up a lot lately.
Yeah. So, but
Mike Judge always said that he didn't realize he was making a documentary.
Yes.
Or people thought that like that would be 50 years at least in the future. That something,
Yeah.
start to see.
Yeah. But but life is fascinating. So really interesting times.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your background. You wrote some science fiction TV
Yep.
shows, right?
Yep. Well, my background basically was grew up here in LA. And when I was 10, Star Trek debuted. And that was like, I always say some people have heroin. I had Star Trek. And and it was before VCR. So I actually recorded each episode on reel to reel audio tape in case the show never aired again.
Oh my God.
And
Wow.
and I was being raised by a single mom, and one of her boyfriends was a comedian who was in showbiz. And he said, get in the car one day, and he said, I have a surprise for you. And he took me to Nichelle Nichols' apartment, and I met Nichelle Nichols while Star Trek was on the air.
Wow.
And she signed a photo to me and gave me these scripts that were her scripts of Star Trek. And later on, I got to go to the Star Trek set for the last episode they ever shot, Turnabout Intruder. And it just set me to thinking about how much I'd like to be a writer, producer working in TV, particularly in science fiction, because I was a science fiction kid. And when I grew up, I got my degree in painting, sculpture, and graphic arts at UCLA because I was wondering if I'd be an artist or a writer.
Yeah.
But then at 19, I sold my first short story. I went to the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop and sold my first short story. And I knew then I would be a writer. And I got out of college, started writing the Twilight Zone companion to educate myself as to how great television was made, so I could make my own. And so I'm also the world's expert on the Twilight Zone, oddly enough, and which is better than being, the world's expert on bratwurst or something, And well, yeah, exactly.
Somebody out there is the world's foremost expert on bratwurst.
That's right. The road not taken. And so by the time, I started writing the Twilight Zone companion when I was 21 or 22. And a friend of mine was writing for animation, and he asked me if I'd like to come into TV and write animation with him. And I thought that's my ticket in. So when I was 22 or 23, I was writing for, animation, and I was writing for Smurfs and He-Man and Super Friends and Real Ghostbusters and The Littles and all these great shows. And then eventually, after a few years of doing that and becoming the god of animation and learning my craft that way, I jumped over to live action, developed Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, and then was story editing Friday the 13th series and writing for Sliders and Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5, on and on and on and on and on. And that's been my life. And so for the last several decades, that's what I did. My main art form was television. I love TV, and because you can reach a mass audience. And then I would also write books periodically. I wrote a book with Guillermo Del Toro not long ago, and novels and so forth. And and it's been.
I love how you're just casually throwing out all of this like crazy stuff about like working for Star Trek and a book with Guillermo Del Toro. It's just like I'm just in here like, oh my God, any one of those things would be amazing.
Yeah, it's a dream come true. The fascinating thing is that I grew up reading science fiction, as you can tell from these books behind me, and I luckily in science fiction, your heroes go to the science fiction conventions. And so when I was a teenager, I started going to these conventions and meeting Ray Bradbury and Harlan Ellison and Theodore Sturgeon and all these guys who'd been not only writing for the shows I loved, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, Star Trek, but also writing the books I loved. Mm-hmm. And they became friends and mentors. And so it was terrific. And so I've been very, very blessed. And then more recently, like 29 years ago, I started a roundtable for writers and directors and actors and producers just to create a compassionate Hollywood. And it grew from 6 people to several thousand all around the world with offshoots all across the country. And it's called The Table. And I started hearing about crowdfunding. And I had this idea for a show that would be forward-looking and would basically say we can create a future worth living in if we just reach across boundaries and barriers. And like Star Trek had inspired me. I didn't want to do something nihilistic or dark. And so I thought, instead of going to the networks and studios where they might cut me off at pilot or cut me out for script, I'll reach out to my fans and see if they respond. And they did, via crowdfunding and selling investment shares in Space Command, which is the project. My fans have given me to date over $3 million, and that allowed me to open a studio. And we've shot the first 5 hours of Space Command. In fact, we were shooting some of the 6th hour this past weekend. And I have my own studio, and I can do basically whatever I want. My
Dude,
my
that's
wife and I
great.
write and produce and direct together, so it's dream come true.
Wow. So how's that going? The production
Great.
of Space Command. I mean, let's hear about that, or if you can talk about it. I mean,
Yeah, no, I'm ask me anything. It's yeah, well, it's going great. I'm the only writer who wrote for both Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5, and basically the way both shows worked is you had what are called standing sets, your basic sets. And with Babylon 5, all of their exteriors were computer generated. They never went anywhere. They stayed in the building. The Teamsters didn't even find them until year 3. And, and so, and then they had to negotiate with the Teamsters. But so I thought, and when I was on the Star Trek set when I was a kid, to be able to sit in the captain's chair and look up at the transporter and see the little light bulb that was screwed in and just see all that amazing stuff. And so a few years ago, I directed an episode of Star Trek New Voyages, which was a fan production, and we shot with George Takei, and it got nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula, which was the 2 top awards in science fiction. And I saw that what was happening with the advent of technology, that you could edit on a Mac, or a PC. You had the internet as a distribution network that could reach millions of people. And fans all around the world were learning production. We're learning how to shoot stuff and edit stuff and do visual effects and all of this. And fans were now making their own productions that were approaching the quality of network shows. And I saw that there was a great opportunity that people from my world were not exploiting, were not utilizing. And because everything I'd done prior to Space Command was I was working for the studios and the networks. I worked for basically all of them, all the major ones. And but when I came up with Space Command, I thought, let's see if I can open my own studio, build my own sets. And I invited my friends to be in it. So it was like Doug Jones and Robert Picardo and Mira Furlan and Bill Mumy and on and on. I mean, all these people from Star Trek and Babylon 5 and so forth that I'd worked with. And, Doug Jones is in Star Trek Discovery now. And they all said yes. And so I basically write along with my wife, Elaine, I write it, direct it, produce it. The buck stops with me. And now we're talking.
Is that freeing, or is that? It seems like it could be a lot of pressure.
No, it's fun. It's super fun. It's really, really. I mean, I'll walk you through some of this stuff. But now we're talking to Netflix and Amazon and all those guys to see if anyone wants to partner with us. We've written the full season of Space Command, and our goal this year is to shoot. We shot 5 hours. We're going to shoot the rest of the first season plus. And what my whole thing in my entire career has been to set an impossible goal and then achieve it and then set something bigger. And so off of Space Command, which has now been seen by over 3 million people on Mr. Sci Fi, my YouTube channel, I came up with something called the Showrunners Network, where I'm creating a slate of 6 science fiction shows. Space Command is one of them. And my collaborators are some of the creators of the greatest science fiction shows ever. So I'm creating a show with Rockme O'Bannon, who created Farscape and Alien Nation and Sequest and Defiance. He's on the show Evil now as an executive producer. Mark Ferguson and Hawk Osby are creating another show with me. They created The Expanse and wrote Children of Men and Iron Man. I'm doing a new Rod Serling series where I'm talking to Rod's family about that and the agent and so forth, and it's great fun. And the idea is that we'll shoot the pilots, take them out to the buyers as a slate, and see if we can reinvent how television is made. Change the paradigm and put it in the hands of the creators. And and so that's huge fun. And so yeah, I have no complaints. Every day's Christmas.
So wow, I don't even know where to start.
I know.
I want to relay a little bit of a story. You got far more than I do, clearly, but okay. So I went to film school, made a movie back in the early aughts and whatnot. And a couple of friends of mine that I went to film school with here in North Texas went off to LA, started kind of getting work with the studios and whatnot. One of them, now he edits TV shows and that kind of deal. But anyway, when I started getting early on in YouTube, first of all, it was very difficult for me to let go of the film thing. Because for me, it was like everything was movies, and YouTube, to this day, I still kind of shirk when people congratulate me a little bit too much for the YouTube thing. Cause I still feel like, but I was aiming over here and I landed here and this is great, but I was aiming over there. So it still feels like a bit of a, I hate to use the word failure because that's not the right word, but
No.
you know, like I hit the wrong mark. It still feels like that sometimes. But anyway, so I'm going out to VidCon at Anaheim, and I sit down and have a drink with that friend of mine that's editing TV shows and stuff. And I'm super proud of him. I can't believe he's getting to do this stuff, you know. And we're sitting there talking, and I was kind of, I don't know, making fun of myself because I'm doing YouTube like a 13-year-old or something. And he was like, no, you're at the Vanguard.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, come on. You know, I thought he was just being nice. He was like, no, that's where everything's going.
Yes.
He said, you're positioning yourself in a really good place. And I was kind of like, and it just kind of stuck in my head. I walked away like, what, really? And everything that you're talking about right there it gets me excited because it's almost like a mixture of those two worlds. It's if you want to call YouTube social media, but like online content, whatever.
Yes.
Mixed with the traditional studio kind of thing and making traditional TV shows and stuff. You're kind of bridging that gap, which I think is really interesting.
Well, what's really unusual is that someone from my world usually isn't at the forefront of the new medium, but because I think it's part of part of it is because I'm a historian of television. In writing the Twilight Zone book when I was in my early 20s, I really got to study how TV grew and developed and the arc of that. And I tell people that my favorite network is YouTube. Because when I was writing the Twilight Zone Companion, if you wanted to watch some TV rarity, something that Rod Serling had written in the live days of TV, you had to go to like a university archive, put a 16 millimeter print on a moviola, and watch it on a screen about as big as a iPhone. And now you just type that into YouTube, and there it is. And it's like, holy cow! And so I love the new medium. I mean, when I started in television, you were shooting on 35 millimeter. It was 2 days before you could even see your dailies. There was no video assist, so you couldn't even tell if you'd gotten the shot you needed.
And it was out of focus the entire time.
Yes, and if you wanted to reach an audience of millions, you needed a studio or network or a major publisher because there was no alternative. It was too expensive. And now, that's none of that is the case. And I mentioned just before we started that I've written a new book called Greenlighting Yourself. And the whole idea is because through my roundtable that I run, so many young writers and directors and actors and producers are going, well, but I can't have my dream because the studios won't let me. They won't buy my script. They won't blah, 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 blah. And I say, no, there's, one thing science fiction never predicted was that we would all carry video cameras in our pockets. Right. And so there's really no excuse. And when I say that, Joe, that you're one of my heroes, it's not bullshit. It's like, I love watching your videos. You have a personality that comes across, and it's utterly charming and engaging. And what you're interested in is so fascinating. You articulate it so well, and you're funny. And so I think I guess the message is bloom where you're planted. I guess because you have, but it's like. For me, I didn't know if this would work, but it is working. But I have to be very, very inventive. And in the book, I say that the key to success is confidence mixed with humility. Confidence allows you to get where you're going. Humility allows you to continue learning along the way. And I'm not. One of the things that allows me to do what I do. Well, for instance, when I wrote the pilot of Space Command, I knew the 2-hour pilot. I knew that I was going to be casting a lot of very famous actors who had fan followings from all these different shows they'd done. So I had this crazy idea, which was, since the world was financing me, I remember the great talent search for Scarlett O'Hara back at Gone with the Wind in 1939. And I thought a lot of Kickstarter campaigns they'll promise like a little walk-on role or a cameo or maybe one line. And I thought, no, let's have a worldwide talent search where anyone anywhere can audition for 2 of the lead roles. Okay, so they could download the audition scenes, record their own audition, and they would be seriously considered for the two lead roles, Captain Cameron, Cadet Bradbury. And so we got 7,000 inquiries, 1,200 video auditions, and we ended up casting, I think, 6 actors out of that. Mm-hmm. And they're our leads. I mean, one of them, in fact, we were just shooting with on this weekend. And now one of our actors is a recurring role on Walking Dead. He just came off Doom Patrol. And Christina Moses, who I cast to play Sulu's daughter in the Star Trek episode I did, is now on A Million Little Things on ABC. So I don't see YouTube or crowdfunding or any of these things as separate from the studios and the networks. My life is extremely permeable in that way. And, I just, my goal is what I learned from Star Trek when I was a kid is that 1 hour of TV or even 1/2 hour with Twilight Zone can change someone's life forever for the good. And so I take that responsibility very seriously. So my journey in this life is just to take something from my heart and share it with the world.
I'll get you back to Mr. Sci Fi in just a minute, but if you're a fan of science fiction, you might be familiar with the works of Philip K. Dick. He was the author of books like The Man in the High Castle, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and A Scanner Darkly, and his works have influenced movies like Blade Runner, Total Recall, Minority Report, and, well, really an entire generation of science fiction. And you can learn all about his life and career in the film The Worlds of Philip K. Dick on CuriosityStream. It examines his works through the lens of his lived experience and how his books and hundreds of short stories have influenced literature and the way we think about technology in general. If you love you some dystopia, this is right up your alley. Of course, this is just one of hundreds of films and video series on CuriosityStream that explore topics that tickle your nerd bone, with everything from compelling programs from some of the best documentary filmmakers in the world all in one place. It's your go-to spot to nerd out on pretty much any topic that crosses your mind. But here's the thing. When you sign up with CuriosityStream, you also get Nebula, which is another amazing streaming platform made by YouTube creators like myself for fans of educational YouTube content like myself. It's where you can watch videos totally ad-free and also see exclusive series that we couldn't monetize on YouTube. It's kind of our little place to experiment and do cool stuff without having to be beholden to the algorithm. Like my original series, Mysteries of the Human Body, where I talk about the body that you currently inhabit and, well, everything that can go wrong with it. But, in a funny way. Yeah. We cover unexplained diseases and plagues throughout history, human oddities, and the mysteries of why we age and die. And you can get both of these amazing platforms for only $14.79. That's not $14.79 a month. That is for an entire year for 2 streaming services, which is crazy. So yeah, to get all that, just go to curiositystream.com/JoeScottPod. Again, that's curiositystream.com/JoeScottPod, and you can be rolling in that sweet, sweet nerdy goodness. So yeah, one more time, curiositystream.com/JoeScottPod. Go check it out. And thanks to CuriosityStream for supporting this podcast. Now back to Mark. The whole reason I started the YouTube channel, really, well, not the whole reason, but one of the big main reasons was, I did a couple of Kickstarter campaigns for projects that unfortunately, just didn't quite happen.
Yeah.
And I got tired of asking people to help support these projects and I had a lot of guilt about that, to be honest.
Yes.
People support this thing and then it never happens and I'm just walking away. So anyway, I was like, why don't I start a YouTube channel and see if I can build up an audience and then, make something for that. So, yeah, if I'm being honest, I'm kind of at that point now where I'm starting to think about like how I can make that plan a reality, and I've got some projects in the works and stuff. But.
Well, we can definitely talk about that. And it's not as big a leap as you might think. And also, by the way, here's 2 tricks that I use that work very, very well for me. I embrace unstoppability. So if I say I'm going to do something, I do it no matter how hard it is. And my mantra to myself at various times has been, I am made of iron and nothing will stop me. Mm-hmm. And as a result, but you have to put aside guilt and shame, because like, for instance, we're finishing the first 2 hours of Space Command now. It has 1,800 visual effects shots, which is crazy. And,
wow, that is a lot.
And back in the first campaign we had, I think we've had 7 or 8 crowdfunding campaigns over the years. The first campaign, there was a guy who put in a significant amount of money to have a speaking role in Space Command. And finally, a decade later, we finally put him on camera this weekend. So it took a decade,
Yeah.
and he was over the moon. He was overjoyed. It's like, Jesus Christ, I'm glad you survived. You know, and but he was terrific, and so throughout that decade, I was thinking, oh, that poor guy, you know, and yet it was like I couldn't give into that. I just had to say, I am on my journey, and it may take longer than I think. It may be harder than I think, but that's irrelevant. I have to just finish what I started.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been my mantra, and it's worked. But I'm flying by the seat of my pants, just like so many of us are, and but the good part is that I'm getting to live my dream. It's so terrific. Just to put it in perspective, this weekend we built a hospital on a space station as our set. Okay. So we have the hospital and the cafe. Now we're repurposing that set into a departure lounge on a separate space station. That space station was orbiting Jupiter. The one we'll shoot next is orbiting Earth, and so you start dealing with all that stuff. And, how cool, but, here's the fun part. When I wrote the Twilight Zone Companion, one of the cool things about the Twilight Zone is that Rod Serling shot it at MGM, which of course was the greatest studio of the Golden Age. And he had access to every prop, costume, and set MGM ever built. So you can see a million things from Forbidden Planet and Twilight Zone. And they shot on the Andy Hardy Street and Meet Me in St. Louis and on. So when I was hired on Sliders at Universal, we were shooting on the Universal lot. I was a producer on that show as well as a writer. And I said to them, do we have access to every prop, costume, and set that Universal has made? And they said, no one's ever asked us that question. We'll check. And they came back and they said, yes, with a very few exceptions, you do. So we use stuff from 12 Monkeys and Time Cop and Jurassic Park and on, which gave us great production value.
Yeah.
So now that I'm doing Space Command, a lot of stuff we're building, like the space, our hero spaceship and all that stuff, but also I'm acquiring things. My favorite thing in the world is big budget science fiction movies that tanked because they put a ton of money into production design and almost no one saw the movies. Yeah. So I've bought stuff from Cloverfield Paradox set pieces, Cloverfield Paradox, Ender's Game, Passengers, on. And that allows us to build out from what we have with all these incredible. We just bought a cryogenic pod from Passengers that we used this past weekend. I've got 17 spacesuits from some we've built from scratch, and others we've acquired from different movies. So I knew that lesson from Rod, and then but also when I say I'm not proud, I'm not arrogant. For instance, in my neighborhood in West Hollywood, people throw out stuff a lot, like furniture and TV sets. And so I'll carry it home. I'll put it in the garage and we'll use it on for instance, for the departure lounge we're building for next time, someone threw out 3 matching white leather chairs. And then someone else threw out a matching white leather sofa. And someone else threw out a matching white end table. And then whoever had the 3 chairs that they threw out a 4th one that matched. So I'm going to be building the furniture for this departure lounge from all this matching white leather furniture, and we'll put view screens, like screens in the white end tables to have like commercials for interplanetary space lines, and bang, you've got your set. So,
has it ever worked backwards where you got a piece of a prop or equipment or set or something, and then it was like, I could write something around this?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Any examples of that?
Oh yeah. Well, like it's gosh, what have people gotten? Well, even the sleep pod that I saw in Passengers that was available, I thought, okay, I can utilize that. But more, it just, yes, absolutely. It feeds into everything else. For instance, the departure lounge, one of the fun things, I like having little Easter eggs relating to the history of science fiction. Mm-hmm. So I've been acquiring either costumes that were made or duplicates of those costumes from Forbidden Planet, Fifth Element, all this different stuff. And so in the departure lounge, I'm going to have people walking by in the background in these costumes from Starship Troopers and all these different movies. And the fans, of course, will say, holy cow, I know what that is. Even from Space Patrol, which was a live TV show in the 50s that inspired me. I didn't see it when it first ran, but I saw kinescopes of it later, and met the star of that show, Ed Kemmer. So I named Captain Kemmer in Space Command after Ed Kemmer, who starred in Space Patrol in the 1950s. And but yes, everything is grist for the mill. Mm-hmm. Everything is like it's fascinating. And then one person who popped up is this actress from Russia named Tatiana. And she was on the shoot this past weekend. She's going to be a recurring actor in Space Command. And I name all of the Space Command characters, at least who are in Space Command, in the service of Space Command, after classic science fiction writers. So we've got Bradbury, Le Guin, Simak, etc. Mm-hmm. And if they're foreign actors, then I have to find a science fiction writer from that country. So for instance, with Tatiana, I remember the Strugatsky brothers who wrote Roadside Picnic, and so she's Tatiana Strugatsky. That's the character's name. So it's fun. It's just fun. But yeah, everything shows up one way or another. It's like when I was a kid, my mom bought me a spacesuit, and there's Western Costume, which provides costumes to the movies and TV shows, had a sale that was open to the public when I was 12. And one of the things they were selling was a real spacesuit. It was a Navy high altitude suit. It was used in Twilight Zone and other productions, and my mom bought it for me. It was $25. And so my cameo in Space Command is there's this crash landing that's very elaborate, and there's a guy at a terraforming station on Mars watching this thing happen, and he says, "Wow." And that's me in that spacesuit. So, so I wrote that because I knew I would be in that spacesuit for that moment. So, and my dad built a replica Bugatti car, and that's in Space Command as well. So I use whatever I have, and it's fun to be inventive. It's just fun to figure out ways to make this machine go.
That's really cool. Can I step back though?
Yeah.
Talking about when you were a kid and you got to go meet
Nichelle Nichols.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So growing up in LA and
yes.
having access to that kind of thing.
Yes.
I'm always fascinated by those little things when you're a kid that wind up shaping you as you get older,
Yes. Yes.
I talk endlessly about how I grew up in a small podunk town in Texas and whatnot. And obviously I didn't have access to anything like that,
Yeah.
And I think that there's something about like, I'm going to go on a little tangent for just a second, but
no, please.
If you are brought up in a family where both of your parents went to college, then you going to college is not like a big deal. It's kind of expected.
Yes.
Like, it's just because that's what your parents did. You see it, you grow up seeing it. It's something that people can do. So you go do it.
Yes.
And I think people that grow up around the film industry see being in film as like, it's a thing that you can do because I know so-and-so's dad is in it and this guy over here does it, and it just kind of lowers that mental barrier, I guess, whereas if you grew up in the Midwest and you had no access to anything like that, it just seems like this impossible dream.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm just kind of curious about like growing up around it. Like, you told those stories a second ago, but how did it shape you, not just toward like doing sci-fi and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that it did kind of plant a seed, like this is a thing that can be done? I know people that do it and I can do it too, Well,
the book that changed my life is right here. Making of Star Trek. And thanks to this wonderful website called eBay, I was able to recently...
Electronic Bay?
This is a copy that was actually signed by Gene Roddenberry and Majel Barrett and other Star Trek luminaries. And so when it was put up for sale, because I bought my own copy when I was 13 when this came out, I emailed the person and said, well, what's the provenance on this? How do I know that signature is authentic? So she said, well, this was my mom's copy, and here's a photo of her on the set of Star Trek with Leonard Nimoy.
He's giving her the pinch.
Right. Now, if you're enough of a geek, a Star Trek geek, you know that episode is Spock's brain because of the costume he's wearing. So, but I read this book when I was 13, and it was the first book I ever read on how television was made. Okay. And because I had no notion, because my family was not in show business. I mean, my mom
Okay,
had
yeah, I
one
was wondering
boyfriend.
about that.
Yeah, my mom had one boyfriend who was a former Borscht Belt comedian, and he was lining up the prizes for the dating game and the newlywed game when my mom was dating him. He's the one who took me to Nichelle Nichols' house, and but the great part I didn't mention about that was just before the pandemic, we shot a Space Command scene with Nichelle Nichols, and we went to her house, and I brought the Star Trek album that I have a Star Trek album of clippings from Star Trek that I kept when I was 10. And it included the letter she'd written me and the photo she had signed to me.
Oh.
And I brought that on the day that I directed her in that scene for Space Command, and 50 years later, right? And that was just a dream come true. But
how did she react?
She was floored. She was so moved. And we sat looking through the scrapbook with all the articles about her from 1968. And it was just a dream come true. It was wonderful. And, but again, these people are such heroes to me, and such, I mean, it's just magical. It's like, it really is like living in Oz, being able to do all this stuff, and except without, the Wicked Witch. And, but in terms, to answer your question, it was never a sure thing that I would succeed. I didn't grow up with my dad being Steven Spielberg or something,
Sure.
And I just kind of, so a lot of my career has been trying to figure out, okay, how does this work? That's why I wrote Greenlighting Yourself, because a lot of people have the passion and they have the heart and they probably have the talent, but it's just like, because a lot of the common wisdom about how you break into Hollywood is total bullshit. It's like, well, just write a great script. Well, you watch TV and movies. How many of those are great? Clearly, a lot of really shitty scripts are getting made.
Yeah.
So clearly those people didn't write a great script. They had some other way to make that happen.
And can I say, as somebody who wanted to be a screenwriter all my life, that was a very frustrating thing to be told.
Yes.
Is that, well, you just got to write a great script. It's like, well, I could write the best script in the world, but if it never leaves my desk, then, there's clearly something else involved.
Well, when I mentor young people who have just come to Hollywood, I say the first piece of equipment you have to buy when you get to Hollywood is a bullshit detector. And but when I was very young, I met Charles Jaffe. He was Woody Allen's agent and then his producer. And I said, Charlie, in film and TV, where's the power? And he said, in film, it's the director or the writer, director hyphenate. In TV, it's the writer, executive producer hyphenate, the showrunner. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, well, because directors basically run movies and TV is run by the writers. And that was thanks to Rod Serling. And he was really the first modern showrunner. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to be in TV. I'm going to fit. I've written features on assignment and stuff, but TV's always been my main thing because the writers run it. And I have power.
Interesting.
Yeah, I have power. But I think, yes, you're right. The growing up here in Hollywood, I mean, you would find it's a company town. Mm-hmm. And so it is very much, sort of in the DNA of the town. When I was 13, my mom worked doing PR for a driving school. And they gave her a company car, which was a driving school car with the light on top and the two steering wheels and the dual brakes and things. And Mannix, which was a TV show that they were doing at Paramount at the time, had an episode where a blind person sees a murder. I know that they're present to a murder, and Mannix has to convince the killer that this person can see, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have this gag where the person's driving a car, and it's a dual driving car, and Mannix has his coat over. He's really driving, but the person's in the driving seat. So they actually took my mother's car and redressed it to be that car in Mannix. So even though I didn't grow up with anyone in my family in showbiz, it was still very much kind of like, okay, well, my mom's car is in Mannix this week.
Yeah, you're adjacent to it.
Yeah. But if I hadn't met my friend Michael Reeves, who brought me into, because I took Theodore Sturgeon's right. Okay, a big part of making it in Hollywood, and when I say Hollywood, I mean world media. I think of you as much a part of Hollywood as me, quite frankly, because you're by my lights, you're a TV star, frankly. And again, there's only one rule of Hollywood and I mean the world entertainment industry, which is to entertain. And you do that. You do that superlatively well. And so I don't differentiate between what you're doing and what J.J. Abrams is doing, or Guillermo del Toro. Sincerely,
I have thought about shooting in anamorphic.
Yes, I think that would
I need some lens flares across my face when I'm recording.
Yes. And
my J.J. Abrams joke.
Well, that's why I switched up to Guillermo, because he's less of a problematical creative spirit. And but the thing is, it's all about entertaining people. That's really what this business is. You have to entertain people, and then you can educate them and all that. But first you entertain them. That's why you're funny, and that's why that leads people in. That's your gateway drug. Humor is your gateway drug to enlightening people.
Humor is
someone
my
who doesn't. Well, yeah, because someone who doesn't necessarily care about the ice shelf falling into the sea will say, well, let's see what he says that makes me laugh today, and then they have a little bit of a chuckle and maybe they learn something, hopefully. But yes. So but when I was a teenager, after I sold my first short story, I came back to finish my 2 years of art school at UCLA. And Theodore Sturgeon, the great Theodore Sturgeon, was teaching a writing class in the adult education department of UCLA. And as an undergrad, I was forbidden from taking the adult education classes. But Ted had written for Star Trek. He'd written wonderful books and short stories. And so I said, well, hell with that. I'm not going to let that rule stop me. So I enrolled in his class. And his teaching assistant was a young writer named Michael Reeves, who had gone to Clarion 3 years before I had. And we became friends. And he's the one who's then writing for animation and brought me in to write for Space Ghost and then Smurfs. And then I could write on my own as well. And off I went. Mm-hmm. But if not for that, I might never have broken into TV. It might not have worked. It really does. The fascinating thing about life is that there are always things that are in your control and things that are out of your control.
Yeah.
And all you can do is do your work and hope that, you catch a break here and there, So,
well, that's kind of where I was starting that whole conversation, just the little tipping points along the way.
Yeah.
Even if it's just like a little influence when you're a kid, or the person that you meet randomly at a, party or something that winds up, changing your life. It's a fascinating thing to think about.
Yes. But one thing that served me very, very well is that, as I said earlier, science fiction is amazingly inclusive. Like if you said, I want to meet Brad Pitt, good luck. But if you said, I want to meet, insert science fiction writer name or science fiction actor name here, whoever is your hero, you could go to a science fiction convention, particularly when it's not a pandemic, and meet your heroes. And that can lead to great things. And if I've done one thing right in my career, I've chosen mentors who were doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And whether it was Theodore Sturgeon and Serling, Rod Serling passed away 2 years before I wrote the book or started the book. But I learned from him because his widow, Carol, gave me access to everything and all of his stuff. And I got to meet and become friends with many of the people who did Twilight Zone. And that was wonderful, So I choose mentors who I want to learn from. And that helps a lot.
Yeah. What do you think it is that science fiction lends itself to the whole convention thing? Like, why don't other genres have that?
Yeah.
Or do they? And I just don't know about it.
It's because science fiction began, H.G. Wells and Jules Verne are the fathers of science fiction, particularly Wells. And, but science fiction fandom started in the earlier years of the 20th century with amazing stories and Hugo Gernsback. The Hugo is named after Hugo Gernsback, the editor of that magazine. And so there was a whole generation of kids who were the science fiction fans of that era. And they grew up to be Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury and so forth. Mm-hmm. In the last 10 years of his life, Ray was a very dear friend and mentor. And I'd go over his house about once a month and we'd talk about life and career and art and all of that. And he told me about going to the first World Science Fiction Convention in New York. Forrest Ackerman loaned him $100 so he could take the bus to New York. And and Ray told me that he loved the convention, but they had a banquet, and it was $1 to have the food at the banquet, and he didn't have the dollar, so he stood in the back of the room for the banquet. But that generation of fans became the writers, and so it was very permeable. And so the authors, it was all one big family. It was very collegial. And from that, you had the World Science Fiction Convention and so forth. And then it blew up and became big. once film and TV, once science fiction became the dominant moneymaker in film and TV for decades.
Yeah.
It was just, of maybe a few thousand people at most were science fiction fans. And then it became mainstream with Star Trek and 2001: A Space Odyssey and so forth. But it wasn't until the 60s, that wasn't the case. And
so those conventions almost served as an incubator of sorts.
And still do. That's the amazing thing. And still do. If you want to, when people tell me they want to be science fiction writers in books, I say go to the World Science Fiction Convention and the World Fantasy Convention, because that's where the writers and the agents and the book editors are. And they're very passionate. I say, and they're not like Hollywood people. They're really nice, so, they're not assholes. And, because they have a passion for what they're doing, but they'll also, if you buy them a drink, they'll actually sit down and talk with you. And they'll, it's like, back when Game of Thrones was such a huge thing, I said to people, well, you can't, if you go to Comic-Con, you're not going to meet George R.R. Martin and sit down with him, because he'll be mobbed everywhere he goes. But the World Science Fiction Convention, which only gets a few thousand people, he puts on a party every year. You can meet him, you can talk to him, and that doesn't mean he's any less of a, god than he would normally be. But it just means he's approachable, because he knows that he's with his family, basically the extended family of fans. And so that's why it's wonderful. And I'm part of that too. When I go to a convention, or even in this conversation, I mean, you can tell that I'm approachable. I'm not a Hollywood, weasel, and because I think Hollywood is so needlessly cruel and arrogant and stupid. And I want to be a counterweight against that. The people who made me what I am were people writing from their hearts. You can tell with Rod Serling. I mean, my God, he was incredibly passionate. And when you see Rod on Twilight Zone, if you'd met him, he would have been that same guy. Maybe, I mean, he might have told you a vulgar joke or two, because he had a great sense of humor. But he was that guy, very much so.
I wonder if like science fiction fans just in general have a bit more of an optimism to them, or as Neil deGrasse Tyson might call, a cosmic perspective, a bigger picture perspective on things. Like that, just if you're a fan of science fiction, you're just going to be a little bit more in that mindset maybe than the general public. Well, that lends to that kind of culture you were just talking about.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Neil, because he's in Space Command.
Oh yeah,
he's on camera in Space Command. That's the fun part. He because I was at the gym one day and he was there, and I asked him a scientific question about something I was writing, and he figured it out over the next few days and spent 30 minutes on the treadmill telling me what the answer was. And I wrote him in Space Command. But I think science fiction, what really makes science fiction go is that we've always been the oddballs and the outcasts and the super brainy kind of weirdos. I mean, I never thought that Elon Musk would make rockets like this, that we would actually get the bullet nose shiny, spacecraft made of, aluminum or steel or whatever he's using now, brushed steel, is it? And, but when I was reading Heinlein when I was a kid, it was like some crazy billionaire, millionaire back then, finances these plucky scientists to build a rocket to the moon. And now we got that. I never thought that would happen. But it's very clear that NASA's never going to get us to Mars with manned missions, because they're so dependent on the whims of government. And Elon Musk means it. He means it. If we have a chance, it's either going to be China or him to get there first. Definitely. But anyway, so I digress.
That's a whole thing.
Yeah, but the point is that all the scientists and all the science geeks and the hobbyists, they all kind of coalesce. People who don't know science fiction fans think that we're UFO fanatics. Most science fiction fans aren't. But they are science geeks. They're into astronomy and physics and all of that stuff. And so it's just a natural marriage of those areas. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, you're touching on something a second ago about basically like how people in the past thought the future would look, and how sci-fi from the past like predicted things and what they got right and what they got wrong.
Yes.
There's a couple of references that I can throw out, and then we can talk about it, because I think it's really interesting. But I did a video. It's kind of early on in the channel now, but there was the AT&T campaign from the late 80s, maybe early 90s, called the You Will campaign.
Yes.
Yeah, I loved looking back at those because there were some things that they got right, but just
Yeah.
off.
Yes, I saw that video. That was great.
Like the driving through the this is my favorite one, but have you ever paid a toll without stopping? And the guy has like a little credit card reader in his car, and he's like swiping it as he drives through, and I'm like, what?
Yes.
So I mean, they got it right, but
yes,
off a little bit. Sort of on that same note, I don't know, do you watch Red Letter Media?
No.
On YouTube?
No. I'll have to.
I've heard them called your favorite YouTuber's favorite YouTuber. And they're basically film geeks, and they do they're big Star Trek fans, actually. Anyway, they do these things called review, and this is fresh in my mind because I literally just watched this like 2 days ago, but they did one on Total Recall.
Wow.
And it's basically they like look at films that they watched when they were kids again as adults, and they're like kind of looking back and seeing if they remember it correctly and all that. And they just two nerds talking about sci-fi stuff. So anyway, they did the one on Total Recall, and it kind of gave me a flashback to the AT&T thing that I was just talking about. This all comes together, I promise. But about how like they had video phones, but they were like in phone booths. They were like stationary objects.
Yes.
And so that made me think of the AT&T thing, because they had the same thing. They had kids going to a library and like connecting to a teacher in China or something.
Yes.
But computers are always this stationary thing that you went to.
Right.
And it's like even AT&T did not see this coming.
Right. Yes.
Even they didn't see the cell phone coming, and the ability to do all this stuff like what we're doing right now. You're on your phone, right?
It's great. It's great. We're in the future. You bet. Yeah. Absolutely.
But the funny that's one of the things that like nobody saw coming.
No. But the funny thing is, I used to say that one thing science fiction didn't predict was the internet. And then I came across a short story by E.M. Forster from 1909 called The Machine Stops. And it's about this woman, and she's in this little kind of apartment, and she just communicates through her screen. And she gives a lecture, and people all over the world watch it. And her son's on the other side of the planet and says, "Hey, Mom, I want you to come visit me." And she says, "Well, why should I visit you? We can talk on the screen." He says, No, I want you to visit me in person. And she has to pull herself together and go out into the world. And I thought, my God, he nailed it. And he didn't even there wasn't even the word computer. He wasn't using the terms, but it was absolutely the internet. And I thought that's fascinating. And E.M. Forster is generally not thought of as a science fiction writer. He wrote Room with a View, so craziness. But yes, it's fascinating. One thing that was also great about being here in LA was I got to go to Disneyland twice a year through my entire childhood. And they had, when I was a kid, they had the Tomorrowland with the rocket to the moon and Adventures in Inner Space where you go inside an atom and all this incredibly cool stuff. And I loved that version of Tomorrowland, and it's just but it created that future, that kind of gosh gee whiz future. And when I created Space Command, my idea was to use the aesthetic of 1950s science fiction, because I wanted to do something that would make our show look different. And I also love that aesthetic, whether it's the, rocket from, When Worlds Collide, or any of these other things, or the book covers, Ed Emshwiller, or any of this kind of stuff, like City, these great covers. I just really wanted to draw upon that. And, it's just, but yes, it's fascinating. Well, Ray Bradbury, it's really interesting, like with Ray, where, Fahrenheit 451 is an astonishingly predictive book. Yeah. He has wall screen TVs. He's got something he calls a seashell, which is a phone that you basically put in your ear. And,
it's been a while since I've read that, but I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, but he was an amazing in terms of his ability to foresee those kind of things. But Star Trek, of course, had an enormous impact on the future we're living, which is from the communicator. And I often call my cell phone a tricorder, because it actually does much more like what the tricorder did. It had because you can access the world's knowledge through it. Yeah. It's the future. It's really interesting because the real world is always a mixture of the utopian and the dystopian. It's like we get the really bad shit they predicted, like, ruining the planet with global warming and things like that. Yeah. And then you also get the incredibly cool stuff. Like you can ask your computer anything. You can go on Google and ask anything. And usually the answer will be pretty close to accurate. There's inaccuracies all over the internet, of course, but there's also enormous. I mean, when I was a kid, my stepfather bought me the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1965, and we had this wall of these heavy books. I don't have those anymore because you don't need them anymore.
No, I remember that was like a big purchase. Buying an encyclopedia, a whole stack of encyclopedias. My parents had one.
Now kids don't even know what they are, I'm sure, and but it's fascinating. Now, by the way, before I forget, I do want to tell you the answers with Joe that I want you to do if you haven't already done it. Okay. This is what I'm curious about. Okay, so we all know from the astronauts spending their long-term stays up in space, a year or more, that the effect of zero G is very bad on the human body in many, many ways, long term. And in science fiction, of course, for decades, since the first time I became aware of it was in '68 with 2001, and pretty much every science fiction thing since then has, centrifugal force, space, like The Martian is a great example of that, right? With this spaceship they had. And I know that they've done experiments with that, but why haven't any of the space-going cultures designed a centrifugal, a working centrifugal platform in space, or for mission to Mars or the outer planets? Why? And I know that there's the Coriolis effect, and you have to have it's an engineering challenge, but I'm surprised because that would totally diminish those negative physical effects if they had something like that. And I don't know why it's not more actively being pursued in the real world.
I feel like I did a video on that at some point. Was sort of talking about not anti-gravity, but artificial gravity. And I'd have to refer back to it. I've had so many videos that I'm at the point now where it has happened multiple times that I've started to do a video, and in researching it, I found an old video that I made about it and had totally forgotten about.
Right, that's right. You're your own Mobius. You're a Mobius strip just in your own life. Yes,
that's
exactly.
one way of looking at it. Yeah. I'm just I'm eating my own tail.
That's right.
But I'd have to go back and look at it and see what the conclusion was on that.
Because I have my guesses why they haven't done it, which is because it's very difficult. I saw a video where it said okay, here's two starships, Elon Musk starships, and as they go out into space, they have and then they start spinning. But I can see the hazards of that. But it's just curious,
I think it's just kind of like if they can get the workout equipment on there and stuff and let them strengthen their bones, maybe that's enough and has fewer of the perils of the whole spinning thing. They still haven't done a whole lot of construction in space.
Yes,
and that's something I find interesting on the horizon, that they're gonna start actually building big, mega projects in space. And stuff.
And maybe also one of the problems has been that you can't test a centrifugal system on Earth, because that's unlike having the spacesuit go down into the water, and that's sort of similar kind, and they can practice being in the spacesuit in a non-breathable atmosphere on Earth. I think that might be also part of the problem. But again, it was just a curiosity, So I thought, who better to know the answer than you?
I'll swing back around to it. I mean, it's something I haven't really looked into in a while.
It's fascinating, and but it's also so cool. I mean, I've gotten a couple of tours of SpaceX. And SpaceX has been very good to. I mean, they're amazing when you go to the plant, and it's just fun. The convergence of the sciences and science fiction is really, really, really cool.
No, I do find it a couple of things interesting. One is how, kind of going back again to how they tried to predict the future in the past, but I love looking at their visions of today or even the future, because it's really more of a reflection of what is going on there. Like anything in the 50s is all atomic age. Everything is run by, atoms and stuff. And there was one that went way back to 1900s, and there was some French guy that had done all these drawings of what they thought the world would be like in the year 2000. And there were people riding sky whales and stuff. It's what? Where did that come from?
I know.
But airships back in the turn of the century, I've
Yeah.
become fascinated by airships since I did a video on them,
Yes.
and I still think
Yeah.
that they're really cool. And
Yeah.
people seeing those in the sky for the first time, it must have just been mind blowing. You know.
Yeah. I knew, because I had friends who were in the 30s and so forth, and did see the Hindenburg and so forth, and it was astonishing. I mean, the Hindenburg really put paid to airships. It's a shame, because they were actually extremely safe compared to a lot of other modes of transportation. It was just such an amazingly spectacular disaster. You know, and by the way, in terms of technology, here's another thing we don't quite have yet, which is, you know, air cars. This is Blade Runner, of course, the spinner. You know, and that's a
flying car.
Yes, I want one of those. But you know, the other thing they never talk about is, if we had flying cars, can you imagine the chaos of people flying these things, considering what they just do with regular cars? You know, so
well, there's a lot of people working on personal automated drones.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's the loudness of that bothers me the most. Like if you had those buzzing overhead all the time.
Yeah. Oof. It's, you know, I mean, again, there's always the downside and the upside. You know, one thing also, when you were talking about the visualization of the future, one person I wanted to mention was Ron Cobb. Ron Cobb was an artist who was a designer in film. He designed Total Recall. He designed a lot of the human stuff in Alien, the ships and so forth. And I met him when I was 16. I was at a party to launch this alternative newspaper. And he was a political cartoonist. And I met him and I knew of his work. And he took me back to his place that night. And he showed me 10 concept paintings he'd just been hired to do for a friend of his to help sell a movie. And they were all along the baseboard. They weren't even in frames, these 10 gorgeous oil paintings. And those were the paintings that sold the movie Alien. And so that was, and then he was brought aboard Alien and designed the dropship in Aliens and so forth. And, but I mean, these, like, where you go from the, you know, guys like Chesley Bonestell in the 50s to Ed Emshwiller in the 50s and 60s to Ron Cobb, you know, these guys who visualize the future. There's a lot of that stuff that then becomes the design aesthetic of the real life objects that we then have. You know, it's fascinating. I remember there was this terrible movie that Heinlein wrote called Project Moonbase. They rewrote him and screwed it up. But at one point, a guy picks up the phone and the receiver is wireless. It's got a little antenna coming out and the bass part is on the desk and he's walking around with a handset with nothing attached to it. And, you know, again, that's like, okay, that's not bad. That's a pretty good prediction. They nailed that, you know, so. You know, it's fascinating. And
well, it's funny how it goes both ways too, because how many times has science fiction been used to inspire what's going on now? Like how many times have people looked at something that was in Star Trek and been like, why can't we have that?
Yes.
And then just kind of like figure out, you know, how you get there. I think that's interesting. And sorry, I'm just kind of like making random references today.
No, but I agree. And it's fascinating because, again, you know, it's fascinating because until the 60s, science fiction did not have a huge influence on major culture. Okay. And then all of a sudden, Star Trek 2001, all those shows blew up. And then with Spielberg and Lucas, it became the dominant art form in a big way. And Arthur C. Clarke and all these guys suddenly became, well, Frank Herbert, they become multimillionaires. And then it becomes, I mean, you know, it was no longer a niche thing. It became the major culture, the popular culture. And it's been fascinating that way. And again, you know, there's all these strange and interesting ways that you walk down the street and you see, oh, well, that's referencing Star Trek, that's referencing Star Wars, and you can make pop culture references that people get, you know, and Yo Baby Yoda, you know, and all that stuff. And you know, years ago, I came up with an episode of Deep Space Nine called Far Beyond the Stars, in which all you see the characters back in the 50s as science fiction writers. And the reason I wanted to show the world of the science fiction writers of the 50s was to say we wouldn't have Star Trek, we wouldn't have Star Wars if not for the guys who were writing for a penny a word, you know, from Astounding Stories and Galaxy and all of that. And I wanted to pay homage to that world that led to, you know, all the things that have come since. And you know, it's fascinating. And I like you, I love those retro presentations, whether it's from the 39 World's Fair, the Futurama, all that stuff, the Norman Bell Getty's diorama of what the future would look like, or the movie Things to Come, 1936, amazing stuff.
Yeah,
and, I mean, it's pretty fascinating. But the fun part also is, now we're looking at Elon Musk colonizing Mars. Will he succeed? I don't know. I hope so. It's going to be, see, the thing about Mars is it's going to be harder to set up a viable community there than anywhere on Earth. The closest analogy is if you combined like the Antarctic with living underwater, permanently.
Yeah.
And even that's not as bad as Mars will actually be, but I think people will do it. People are very tenacious. They're like human cockroaches. You can put them anywhere and they'll find some way to make it work. And, but also I'm fascinated also by the dovetailing of physics and quantum mechanics, Einstein couldn't nail that down, the unified field theory, but now we're getting more and more sort of into that interesting zone between the two. And quantum entanglement is very, very interesting, so it's just like science, the more we open those boxes, the more mysterious the universe becomes. It's fascinating in that way.
Yeah.
And so I just, it's like, those guys that back in the 19th century who thought we'd run out of things to invent, they wanted to close the patent office. And that were they wrong, so yeah.
Well, to kind of circle back around a little bit,
please.
The effect that media, being like movies, TV and whatnot, has had on culture is like Disney has ruined so much about history. Like so much of what we think of as history is what we were taught as kids watching the old Disney stuff.
Yes.
That was like completely skewed and wrong in a lot of ways and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, random example. I just watched a video yesterday that was talking about how did pirates actually talk? Did they actually say yar and shiver me timber and stuff like that? It turns out it really just came back to the original Treasure Island.
Yes.
And what I forget the name of the actor, but whoever played Long John Silver in that,
Robert Newton.
Robert Newton. There you go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he just kind of like put on this exaggerated Cornwall accent and started making up these little gestures and stuff. And now it's like that is how pirates talked in our minds, and that's just one example of a million of just little things that have come out in movies and stuff that just completely reshaped how we thought about things. And I think science fiction, sort of, again, circling back to like when you're growing up and you see that other people are able to do things, it sort of implants something in your head of the future could be like this. This could be a thing.
Yes.
We could do this. And then it kind of shapes what we're actually capable of doing.
Yes. It's fascinating.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And I mean, it's funny because my brother Steve, who's younger than me, he and his wife watched 2001: A Space Odyssey for the first time a few years ago, and they hated it. They said, "Oh my God, it's so boring. It's so slow." And what he didn't understand was that when 2001 came out in 1968, we thought that movie was a postcard from the future we were going to have. We thought that was showing us exactly, we thought there'd be the space station just like that one. We thought people would be going to the moon, et cetera. It was, and again, we were disappointed in those predictions because we didn't get them. We still don't have computers who actively kill us, but but that's just right around the corner. That's right around the corner.
Fingers crossed. You were talking earlier about how I guess you said 1 hour of TV can change somebody's life.
Yes.
And I completely agree with that. I mean, like I've had people tell me that a video of mine change them in some way. Like you never really know what ripples you're creating when you do this kind of stuff, which I think is interesting. So I would love to hear an example from you of something that similar thing, something that changed your life from watching it, and something that maybe you have done that somebody else has told you has changed their life.
I can answer both those things.
Go.
When I was a kid, as I mentioned, I was recording Star Trek on reel-to-reel tape in case it never aired again because it was so astonishingly revolutionary week after week after week. And the one that really kind of, took my head off and put it back on in a different way and made me weird from then on was City on the Edge of Forever, written by Harlan Ellison, who became a dear friend and mentor. And Harlan, and in that episode, the crew of the Enterprise, or Kirk, Spock, McCoy, go back in time to the 30s and Kirk falls in love with this woman named Edith Keeler, who runs a soup kitchen, and it's played by Joan Collins, and she's really good in it. And he falls in love with her, but then in order to set the time stream straight, she has to die. And so every TV show I'd ever seen before that, and again, this aired when I was 10, every show I'd ever seen before that, the hero saved the girl. It was just a given. And in this episode, the hero literally has to throw her under a truck. And what that taught me was that in your life, in your real life, there will be times when you have to do what's right, and it'll break your heart, but you still have to do it because it's what's right. Mm-hmm. And that was a major, major lesson. And so that's the one that really, really impressed on me. And Harlan, later when I heard Harlan being interviewed and so forth, he would say, you must not waste your audience's time. You must give the best of yourself in everything you do, because, millions of people are spending an hour with you, and you have to make it count. So, okay, so that was, but the thing I learned in my own career was sometimes I'll write things that are that I know are meaningful, hugely meaningful, and that will affect people. But sometimes it's stuff that I might not have thought was weighty, and it'll have a huge effect on someone else. And the example of that was, as I mentioned, I learned my craft writing animation, and I never really wanted to be an animation writer particularly, but that's how I broke in. And I brought my A game to it. I bring my A game to everything I do. And, but years later, when I was, 20 years later, when I was writing live action and all that stuff, I got a letter from someone, and they said, you wrote my favorite He-Man episode, Curse of the Monster, which was originally called Curse of the Monster God, but they wouldn't let me use the word God in a title. Curse of the Monster, and can I send you a couple of screen grabs for you to sign? So I said, sure, you bet. So he mailed me the screen grabs, and he included a letter. And in the letter, he said, when I was a kid, my dad went to a Halloween party and he was murdered. And that episode of He-Man kept me going through my childhood. And now I'm married and I have a happy life and I have kids and all of that. And I thought, my God, something that I wrote that was just kind of like a week's work for me, was something this kid whose dad was murdered could hold on to for whatever reason. Yeah. And so that was meaningful to him, and it helped him get to a good adulthood. So you never know what you do, how the ripple effect is going to go. I mean, you, for instance, you're doing, your wonderful, wonderful pieces, and I subscribe to them. And then I think, gee, I'd like to have a conversation with this guy. And so I reach out to you, and here we are, and for me, it's a thrill. I mean, I'm sincerely, I mean, it's, it's just great, but you never know what the effect is going to be. That's why you have to come from your heart. See, this is the one thing that's great about the internet. And I know you have to go do, the save a life or whatever, you do. But
there's somebody that needs CPR right over there.
Yeah.
And I need to.
But the one big difference about the internet that I love from back when I started writing for TV, you'd write a television show and it would be a one-way conversation. It would go out to the millions of people, and you might get a fan letter or you might meet someone at a convention, but that'd be about it. But now it's a total two-way conversation ongoingly. The more you let them into your process and into your world, the better. And authenticity counts. They can tell who's full of shit and who's real, who's coming from the heart. And because I'm consistent in my life, in my art, in all of this stuff, that's how I've been able to raise $3 million from my fans, because they know that when I say something, I mean it. And, and when I started Mr. Sci Fi channel on YouTube, it was like my friend Glenn Mazzaro, who ran Walking Dead. He said, I was having lunch with him, and he said, so much about science fiction, you should have your own YouTube channel. And so I just started it, and, and now I've had millions of hits and, closing in on 100,000 subscribers. And it's like, because I can just talk, and I can put Space Command episodes on there, and I can do whatever I want. Just like you can talk about any weird thing you want to talk about, and
that's the beauty of it. No matter how weird or unique or specific you think the thing that you're into is, there's millions of people out there that are into the same thing.
Yes.
And,
yes.
And they connect with that. Yeah.
But also we recognize kindred spirits. And, the moment I saw your work on Answers with Joe, I thought, this guy's someone I think I resonate with. And, and that made me very much eager to meet you, and via the wonders of the computer age, and so
me and my phone booth.
Yes,
my video phone booth.
Our video phones, yes, exactly. But it's wonderful. So this is a thrill for me. I got to say that.
No, I appreciate, man. We could just keep going because there's, like I said, when you started talking about all the stuff you've done, I'm like, where do I even start? My God,
I know.
Jeez. I mean, I have so many questions about how writers' rooms work, and like, there's got to be some crazy stories from the various sets that you've been on and stuff.
Oh yeah. We may
have to do it again.
Well, I'll tell you one last thing in closing, which is when I was on Star Trek set when I was a kid, my friend Fred Bronson took me. He was a college student, and I was a kid, and we were both Star Trek fans, and he, had an in with the studio. At the end of shooting, well, two things. At the end of, they were shooting Turnabout Intruder, the last episode ever, and a guy on the crew said, "Last show of the season," and Majel Barrett, under her breath, said, she played Nurse Chapel, she said, "Last show ever." And the irony is 30 or 40 years later, when I did the Star Trek episode with George Takei, I actually had her as the computer voice on the Enterprise, which may have been the last thing she ever did for Star Trek. She died not long after. So she couldn't predict that her future, but the other thing was, at the end, Fred and I thought, well, let's go in and say hello to William Shatner. And so Fred walked in ahead of me, and Shatner his head was over the sink, and he had his toupee off. He started yelling, get out of the dressing room. And a security guard hustled us off unceremoniously. And so one of the greatest days of my life had that as its coda. But so how the mighty are fallen.
You get to see the Shat without his head on.
And now he's in space. Now he's shot into space
for about 15 minutes. He was,
yeah. And the other thing you learned from that moment, by the way, is Jeff Bezos should never wear a cowboy hat.
I don't know what that was about, other than the fact that he was in West Texas when he did it. But
it was crazy.
Yeah. Well, if you'll stick around for just a second, I did want to run a few things by you, but to just kind of wrap up, people can find you on Mr. Sci Fi on YouTube.
Yes.
Where can they go for Space Command? Where
they can watch the first few hours of Space Command on Mr. Sci-Fi. It's free, and they can subscribe. And I talk about every aspect of science fiction. It's really fun. And then also we regularly have we have a Space Command store that you can link to through Mr. Sci-Fi, and we're going to be releasing the first 2 hours on DVD and Blu-ray with all these cool extras. So I'm an open book.
Well, and speaking of books, you have the one coming out in April, right?
Yeah, and so it'll post for pre-orders probably in later this month on Amazon and everywhere good books are sold. So cool. It's a fun book.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, man. It's been great.
Thanks. I've loved it.
All right. Big thanks to Marc Scott Zicree for chatting with me and for all of his kind support of my channel. I have trouble considering myself to be a peer of somebody that accomplished, but he certainly made me feel that way, and I do appreciate it. Go check out his channel, Mr. Sci-Fi, and throw some love his way, and check out Space Command. If you love the old Star Trek Next Generation episodes, this will feel like a nice little throwback. This podcast was produced by Kimmy Britt, edited by Bray Brown. I'm Joe Scott. You can find me at all the places online at Answers with Joe, and obviously on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and please help spread the word about this podcast, because we're still in the early days. We could use all the promotion we can get. So also feedback is always welcome as well. So all right, thanks again. You guys go out there now and start some conversations of your own. Have a good one.